Welcome into the CBS Sports Network and the only show that covers the game of basketball from recruiting all the way up to the NBA draft. Right off the bat today, I am joined by 24/7 Sports Kansas beat writer Michael Swain because, well, Kansas is in the news, everybody. I went on CBS Sports HQ yesterday to talk about Darryn Peterson and the latest chapter of the availability, let's call it saga. But if you were following the news yesterday, I was not the only one. In fact, it seems that everyone in the national media picked this story up yesterday, and it brought take after take after take. And I'm going to be honest, I thought most of them were crazy and just really illustrated that many of the people giving those takes weren't following this program. No one follows this program closer than Michael Swain. And so, Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, so let's just start with the basics. Like, give me the temperature of the Kansas program right now amidst what can only be described after the media storm yesterday as a distraction.
Yeah, well, it definitely is a distraction when you've got, First Take and seemingly every single sports talk radio show talking about Darryn Peterson. Look, this is something that's been going on for as long as the season's been going, right? You got to go all the way back to, the Louisville exhibition, the first time Darryn Peterson has cramps pop up that limit his availability. So I think if you ask people around the Kansas program, they're kind of used to it at this point. The players are used to the way the availability has fluctuated over the course of the year. The coaches are used to it. And I think what has happened is the Oklahoma State game and Bill Self's press conference after the game. I think people maybe have taken Self's tune and twisted it a little bit, where I think Self was much more frustrated with the fact that Darryn Peterson had cramps again than the fact that Darryn Peterson asked out of the game, because that's been something that's happened a bunch this year. And it's one of those where KU's found ways to deal with it, right? They're still in the hunt to maybe be a number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. They could still technically win the Big 12 if they went out. They control their own destiny. But it's one of those where now you've got the outside narrative and noise coming into this. And I think that's going to create for a very interesting environment as Kansas goes to play Cincinnati and Houston in a Saturday, Monday kind of back-to-back face-off.
That Saturday game, of course, is on CBS. Now, Michael, my next question is going to be about your interpretation of what we've seen specifically from Peterson. Before I do that, though, I think we've got to acknowledge what I alluded to previously, and that is the vast array of takes yesterday from people that I am confident you have never seen at a Kansas game all season long. We've seen this equated to him trying to protect his draft status, which I pointed out yesterday on CBS Sports HQ. Which is just stupid because this is not helping his draft status. Not when you've got, as you mentioned, First Take going up and saying no one should take this guy number 1. So that right off the bat, dumb take. Number 2, that this is somehow like motivated by protecting himself for the NBA draft to make sure he doesn't get hurt. I don't put much stock into that either. Again, the vast majority of these I've seen, I'm like, this guy has no clue what they're talking about. I'm going to tell you the one that gave me a little pause, though. I heard a Markelle Fultz comparison yesterday, and I was like, ooh, that might have some validity there. So I preface my question to you with all that to ask you, what do you make of this series of events from Darryn Peterson at this point?
Yeah, it's Bill Self tried to chalk it up to bad luck. I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. The hamstring injury, bad luck, right? You tweak your hamstring. It happens. That's something that caused him to miss most of the games in December. He comes back. If you watch the games, he didn't look like himself. He was stiff. He wasn't moving well. He wasn't driving. I mean, Adam, you've watched him since high school. You know his ability to drive the basketball is one of his greatest assets, and he was not doing it. So then he misses the final 2 games of non-conference play. And that was really the first time that Bill Self kind of came out and said the quiet part out loud, that Darryn, his dad, and people around him are going to decide when he plays. Because he said Darren's not going to play unless he's 100%. And so then Big 12 play starts and he's in and out. Then there's the game against TCU where if you go to the end of the game, Darryn tries to take himself out and he looks away from the basketball and the basketball gets thrown to him and it lands in Bill Self's arms. So this is something that it's been going on. And if Darryn wanted to shut this thing down, he could have shut this thing down after the BYU game. He'd be the number 1 pick. He outplayed AJ DeBonsta. The cramps came back. He could have said, I'm done. I'm going to take, what I've shown on tape and I'm going to roll with that. But he keeps trying to play. And that to me shows me that this isn't about, hey, I'm trying to protect my draft status, because he could do that and stop playing. I think he wants to try and help this team win. And there's some physical limitation going on where halftime comes, they've got him on a bike during halftime, and he still is cramping up at the start of the second half. So look, if for people that haven't watched the games this season, you can go look at the clip of him tapping and saying, "Hey, self, come get me." And you may think, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" But if you've paid attention, this has been happening. Darren is fighting through the cramps. And if you watch the actual game itself, you can tell when the cramps are coming on because he stops moving. He is not as explosive. And you can even look at the jump shots. Go look at the first shot he makes in the game from the corner. He elevates, shoots over a guy. Go look at that 3-pointer right before he takes himself out of the game. Gets what, 6 inches off the ground? So you can tell this is a physical thing. And if people don't want to acknowledge that, then that's their own problem. But I think this is something that he's been dealing with it and it keeps popping up. And I think that's probably where the frustration comes from around Kansas is the fact they can't get a handle on this.
Now, you made two, I think, phenomenal points there. Number one was the topic of if and when he could have shut it down. If the narrative is about protecting his draft stock, and you are 100% right. That BYU game, anyone who watched that game came, well, let's call it what it is. Anyone who watched that first half came away saying Darren Peterson's the best prospect on the floor. And if it was solely about his draft status, given that the cramps came back in the second half, you shut it down then, and you probably are the number one pick in the draft. Or at least when you, at the point when you shut it down, you are perceived as the number one pick on that day. So I think that right there is the only rebuttal you need to anyone who says any of this has to do with protecting his draft status. The other point that I'm so glad you made, because it's one that I have continued to harp on, is that even when he's been on the floor, you can see when he's not fully himself. I would argue that we have seen him at 100% very rarely this season. The shot making that we're seeing this year at Kansas is beyond my wildest expectations from high school. And I'm the only guy, or we're the only outlet that made him the number one ranked prospect in the country. Everybody else had DeBonsa. And you put the shot making on top of that, and it's like, whoa, now you got something. I've mentioned this story before, but I talked to an NBA scout last month who said, I'm almost more encouraged by this because this shot making is way beyond anything we saw in high school. And, but I do think it's really important to point out, like, when he's been out there, you can see it coming on. You can see it. You know, when I see it, when he's off the ball, when you see him standing and just like kind of anchored to one spot, not moving around the court. And it's often like the first or couple possessions of the second half. I remember it was actually that BYU game. I was in the, texted somebody, one of my colleagues, and said, it's over. He's done. You can tell it. You can tell it's just not there. So I'm so glad you made those points. I think those are really insightful. The other question I want to ask you about, though, is his teammates, because there's been a lot of speculation on this front as well. And he's such a high usage guy. And so many of the guys around him have really been two different versions of themselves, whether Darren Peterson is on the floor or not. What is the vibe around the rest of the roster right now?
Well, I think it's a team that generally enjoys being around each other. And that has not been the case at Kansas over the last few years, right? Last year's team had zero chemistry whatsoever. This is a team that likes being around Darren. Let me start there. This isn't a team, Darren, there's two separate camps. Like, the guys like being around Darren. Are they probably frustrated that Darren's not consistently available? Well, sure. They're in practice every day. And since the summer, they've been talking about, man, this kid is so good. So good. So of course they're going to be frustrated that their teammate's not out there. But I think they've done a fantastic job of managing that. And you see it in games too. The first few minutes when Darren goes to the bench early in the second half, it's a little rocky usually because guys are trying to figure out, okay, is Darren coming back? Is he done? And then there comes a point where it's very clear that Darren's done. That's when the game changes. That's when you see Melvin Council take over. That's when you've seen Trey White have some big moments. You know, Floyd Badunga, Bryson Tiller have improved so much this year. I think in part of that has come from the minutes that they've had to play without Darren, where they've had to assert themselves. And so I think this is a team that has figured out how to kind of have the two faces. It's unfortunate that it's been that way because this team deserves, I think, the fact that they should be able to play together. But the fact of the matter is that Darren is just consistently unavailable. And they've done a really good job of managing that. And the vibes that I get is that they enjoy being around him. They like playing with him, But it's also one of those things where if you're going to try and read into a press conference, I'll tell you that the Kansas communications people do a great job of briefing them. Hey, let Coach Self talk about Darren's health. You could see that after the Oklahoma State game. And they're well within their right to do that. So if you try and read into these player press conferences and guys saying, hey, I'm not going to comment on that, that's not a reflection of what they think about Darren. That's about letting Bill Self be the guy that is the spokesperson trying to communicate the message because Darren himself doesn't talk unless he finishes a game. And so I believe he's talked 4, 5 times this season. And so it's one of those where you're getting Bill Self being the messenger and the teammates are in the locker room. They enjoy being around him, right? You can go down any one of these Instagram lives that these guys are doing post game. That's a team that enjoys being together.
That's the other one. I've heard people say they should let him do media. The fact that he's not doing media, that's what suggests to me that there may be something more going on here. I'm not going to ask you to speculate about that. But Michael, I wanted to have you on because I knew you would be insightful and plugged in. It was beyond my expectations. I know you were in the Kansas facility right now. Bill Self's got media availability later on. You can find Michael and his work over on the Kansas 24/7 site. He is plugged in as he always is, not just this season, but the best on the Jayhawks beat. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. And don't go anywhere. Eric Bossi is coming back next. We're going to break down some of the biggest matchups for this coming weekend right here on the CBS Sports Network. If the Final Four were this weekend, we might expect teams like Duke, maybe Michigan, maybe Arizona, maybe Houston to be in it. Those are four of the best teams in college basketball. Well, lucky for us, we don't have to wait the 2 months for Indianapolis. We've got those four teams squaring off this weekend, and Ebos and I are going to break it all down. Bossi, let's start with Arizona at Houston. What is the first question you have about this matchup?
I I think what this is going to come down to, in my mind, is pace and who can dictate the pace. Because I think you have two teams that want to play entirely different. Arizona wants to play fast. Houston wants to grind you down. If you look at KenPom, Arizona is number 33 in the country in adjusted tempo on offense, while Houston is almost in the bottom 10 at 354. Now that is a huge, huge factor that, I think whoever wins that game is maybe going to, whoever wins the pace game is going to win the game ultimately.
And the game is at Houston. I think that's relevant. The other thing that is relevant is there will be no Koa Pete. Arizona has played without him for a little bit, and that's obviously huge because I think that, to your point, Arizona not only wants to play fast, they want to dominate the paint. That's been their recipe all year long with Pete and Krivas in the middle. Pete plays off that short roll on one side of the floor while Krivas ducks in. Now, Toby Awaka, who has been a starter at places like Arizona and before that, Tennessee, one of the best, I think, backup big men in college basketball. He's a starter at 98% of the places. He can step in, but it does become like a little bit of a depth concern up front for Arizona. Now, what are your thoughts on how Arizona can withstand the loss of Pete in this matchup specifically and what the implications of that might be?
I think that because Awaka is so experienced and so tough, I don't know that there's a huge loss. They lose a little bit of the depth piece. So both Awaka and Mo Krivas are going to have to stay out of foul trouble. But in Awaka, you're talking about a guy who is the number one in the Big 12 in offensive rebounding rate. So giving him more minutes for a team that wants to pound the glass, that's a top 5 offensive rebounding rate team, is probably a good thing. So now it's going to be a matter of, can you find a little bit of a way to adjust for the lack of scoring they're going to have with Pete? And that's where I eventually think that their backcourt and eventually Braden Burries is going to play a big role.
And I think the other piece here is like without Koa Pete, can Arizona match the physicality of Houston in their own building? And then by extension, and this is what I want to get you take your pulse on, like what version of Chris Senak do we get in this one? Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll tell you this about Arizona and physicality. I think they're more than game to match it. I watched them at Kansas here a couple of weeks ago, and they were one of the most physical teams I've seen all year. And in person, it was another thing. Now, in regards to Senak, I think this is interesting for him. Obviously, the Big 12 is a gauntlet, but I really think he got his first true taste of super physical basketball at Iowa State the other night, and he struggled a little bit in the first half, and then he bounced back better in the second half. And I think they're really going to need that because, as I mentioned, Toby Awaka pounds the offensive glass. Mo Krivas is number 4 in offensive rebounding in the Big 12. And Senak, he's a top 30 guy defensive rebounder in the country, and he's number 3 in the Big 12 when it comes to defensive rebounding. And more than ever, he's going to have to step up. He's going to have to play big boy basketball, and he's going to have to be as good as he's ever been on the glass just because of the constant assault he's going to get out of Krivas and Awaka trying to pound that glass.
Yeah, and of course he's going to be teamed up with JoJo Tugler in the front court. I mean, listen, that's going to be a war. That's going to be a wrestling match down low. I do think Arizona, even without Koa Pete, had the potential to give more offense, but it's going to be interesting. I want to talk about the defense now because each of these teams has one of the best freshman guards in the country, and I know you are particularly high on Arizona's Braden Burries. I've heard you both publicly and privately say, and correct me if I'm wrong, you think he is their most important player. What are your expectations for him in this matchup?
I do think that Burries is their most important player. I think he's their most, on the backcourt, he's the one guy who can really get off and carry a team offensively because he can score off the dribble, he can score coming off the screen. So I think that's a huge thing. And the big thing that stand out to me is as Big 12 play has progressed, Burries has done a really, really good job of taking care of the ball and has gotten better and better. In terms of freshmen in the Big 12, he's the second best in terms of taking care of the ball and having a low turnover percentage. In fact, he's even got a better turnover percentage than Kingston Fleming's on Houston, which might surprise you. Now they handle the ball a different amount of times, so that factors in. But he's also much more secure with the ball than his own point guard, Jaden Bradley. So I think they can use him as a secondary playmaker and a guy who scores, which is going to be really important because Houston, what they do defensively, enforcing turnovers and the pressure they give to you as a freshman, you got to be ready to withstand that. And again, to account for the lack of scoring without Pete in there, I really think there's going to be a lot of onus on Burries to really help carry these guys and show why he was a McDonald's All-American. And the thing I love about him is he's game, man. Every time they need him, he comes up big. He was that way in high school, and I really see that being a factor on Saturday.
And then I think an X factor in this one is, does Kingston Flemings make shots? And I'm going to get curious about your perception on this too. I said after that Iowa State game, and I know they lost, but when Flemings is making threes, he's unguardable because we know his pull-up game is really good. We know he can get downhill and pressure the rim. And he's also really good at throwing those live dribble passes when he's in attack mode. Now, when he's making threes, it's a whole different ball game. I think that's a point we've made time and time again. But I would fully expect Arizona to go under ball screens. I would fully expect them to dare him to make shots. If he does, like he does at Iowa State, that's when this gets really interesting. And when I think Houston truly becomes a national championship contender, because while they do have, in my opinion, the best backcourt in college basketball, they allow Flemings to be the centerpiece of that backcourt, despite the fact that they've got Emmanuel Sharp and Milos Uzan on there. Anything you want to add to that before we move on to Michigan and Duke?
Yeah, I see where you're going. I also think it's kind of interesting, though, that in the 2 best games that Flemings has had as a 3-point shooter in Big 12 play of recent were at Texas Tech and at Iowa State. And those are both games that Houston lost. So while you want him making some threes to stretch out the defense and really have them on their heels, I don't think you don't want it to become a game where it's contingent upon him making threes, because I don't think that's the way they win. I think they win when Milos Uzan and Shed are a lot more involved, or not Shed, Sharp, pardon me, Emmanuel Sharp a lot more involved. So it's a very, very fine line there.
That's a great point. It's a great point. All right. Also on Saturday, we've got the 2 best teams in the country, according to KenPom. That's Michigan and Duke. They will meet on a neutral floor, albeit that one that is much closer to Duke than it is to Michigan. This game is being played in Washington, D.C. We're going to approach this conversation very much the same way, analyzing it first from the front court and the back court. Bossy, these are my questions up front, because Michigan's got one of the biggest teams in the country, and we know that the Duke is led by their front court, and specifically Cameron Boozer as well. I don't think you can beat Michigan unless you can space out their bigs. And I do think Duke, with Boozer and Patrick Gamba, have bigs that can stretch the floor, not just as shooters, but as passers. So they can invert their lineups, they can open up the lane and pull guys like Morris Johnson, Ade Mara, and those guys away from the lane. So that to me that's the first variable in this game that I am looking for. Can Duke's bigs pull Michigan's bigs away from the rim when Michigan is on defense? That's variable number one. Number two, can Michigan bully Duke inside? Like when it gets down, and I know that sounds counterintuitive because Cameron Boozer is one of the most physical players in the country. But I'll tell you this, if Cameron Boozer gets in foul trouble, Michigan wins this game. And I just wonder if between Gamba and Malik Brown, can they hold up to Michigan physically? Give me your thoughts on those front court dynamics.
Yeah, I think this game, you may laugh at me, but here's where the contribution of Nick Hemenia could play a big deal, because he has a chance to, if he can make some shots, he can help kind of stretch things out for a little bit. And he can be a guy that, because of his mobility, if you want to play him at the 4, can really cause some problems for some of those bigs at Michigan and helping pull them away from the floor, and his ability to make plays for others too. So if he can maybe step up and provide a little bit more than he's done, show why he's a McDonald's All-American. I think there's been some really encouraging signs out of Nick lately. I think he's kind of the X factor right there when you talk about front court, because I think with most of these guys, we know exactly what we're going to get from them. Whether they have a good game or a bad game, I don't think there's a huge variance. These front court guys are pretty stable. So just a little bit of added contribution from a guy like Hemenia on the Duke side can make a whale of a difference in this ball game.
Yeah, I truthfully hadn't contemplated the possibility of Duke going smaller, so that will be very interesting. Talk to me about the backcourt, because I know you are very interested in those dynamics, and specifically what Duke can get from their biggest perimeter weapons.
Yeah, this is really interesting, because the Duke backcourt is not one that's big on shot creation for themselves or others. Neither Caden Boozer or Caleb Foster, whichever one starts, plays the most minutes. They seem to kind of split these days. Neither of them are really off the dribble, get in the lane, get 2 feet in the paint creators for others. And Isaiah Evans, Dame Sarr, these aren't guys that are really, do-em type players. They rely on others to get them clean looks. They can do some straight line drives, but they aren't guys that you can really count on getting the ball to in a late clock situation and having them go and make a play. So what they do there is going to be really interesting. Whereas on the other side, Michigan, they have those creators. Elliot Cadeau is a creator. LJ Kaysen more and more is proving to be a big time creator off the bench. And I think they are able to get their easier shots for their other guys, whether it be their bigs in the lane or whether it be Namari Burnett, Roddy Gale, Trey McKinney on the perimeter. I think that's a big difference is, can Duke find a way to kind of get some separation off the dribble and make the offense easier for the guys around their guards?
All right, that is interesting. You're making me think. I love it, Bossy. You're making me think. I know you also wanted to bring up Duke's defense a little bit. As good as they are, and they're one of the best in the country, they're not really known for their shot blocking. They're not really known for forcing turnovers. So the question I would pose to you is, can they stop Michigan without doing those two things, blocking shots or forcing turnovers?
I think they can, but they have to do it by what's made their defense so good. Number 2 in the country is they need to continue to force long possessions. You've got a situation where Duke holds opposing offense. I think their opposing offense are number 351 in terms of length of possession. So they really stretch you out and they get you in late clock situations where you're not going to get the best shot. And then they control the glass after those late clock situations. Michigan, on the other hand, is top 15 in the country in terms of how quickly they get those shots off. And then they're top 15 on the offensive glass on top of that. So which one of these things is going to break, right? Either Michigan's going to score quick or Duke's going to force them into long possessions and control the glass. And obviously, I think those long possessions and rebounding and positioning are really going to be the way that Duke can kind of still play top-notch defense without tremendous rim protection and without forcing a ton of turnovers.
Bossy, awesome stuff as always. We knew that you were the recruiting OG. It turns out you are the breakdown OG as well. You can find Eric Bossy on 247sports.com. Speaking of 24/7 Sports, don't go anywhere. We are going to have their new college basketball director of content, Kyle Tucker, joining the show next, right here on the CBS Sports Network. Last week was a big one for 24/7 Sports as they brought in one of the most respected names in college basketball and one of the true storytellers of the sport. Kyle Tucker joined 24/7 Sports as the new college basketball director of content, and we are thrilled to have him on the show today. Kyle, we know you've got Kentucky roots, but you will have a national role leading the way here at 24/7. If you don't mind, though, I want to go back to those roots and ask you about the Kentucky program. You did a feature recently on Mark Pope. You talked about the journey that has been this season. They have, as Todd Golden loves to point out, they have a $22 million roster. And although they have had some losses this year with guys like Jaden Quaintance and Jalen Lowe, my question is like, what are the expectations for Kentucky, both internally and externally at this point in the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, internally, I'm sure they're going to say they're as high as ever. I think externally and realistically, for everybody involved, if you gave them truth serum, is, try to get in this tournament and make the second weekend. And that's not the Kentucky standard, but I think it's what this team can realistically aim for right now. I mean, you get to the second weekend, any kind of magic could happen, I guess. But given where they were a month and a half ago when they were kind of dead in the water and everyone was really mocking that $22 million roster, some people still are. And as Todd Golden did after Florida handled Kentucky last weekend, but they have had to sort of remake themselves. I mean, they're not what they thought they were going to be. I think even when they had more of their pieces, they weren't what Mark Pope thought he was going to have. And realistically, they only signed one point guard, and he's been hurt. And they had they took a real gamble on Quaintance, who was coming off a knee injury, an ACL injury as a big man. That's a huge swing, high risk, high reward. And they've gotten almost nothing out of him. Rick Pitino, I spoke to him also last week. And, one of the things he pointed out is like the one moment in time, the one night that Mark Pope had his point guard and his, 5-star big man, they beat St. John's, and St. John's has barely lost a game since. And so, it's hard to know what Kentucky would have become if they had all the pieces. They didn't look great even when they started out with more of the roster available to them. But they have definitely had to reinvent themselves now. I mean, you've got Denzel Aberdeen trying to play point guard. He's not a natural point guard. You don't really have any shooting, and that, I shouldn't say any. Colin Chandler has actually become one of the best shooters in college basketball. You don't have enough shooting. You don't have enough perimeter playmakers to play the way that we are accustomed to see Mark Pope's teams play offensively. And he even said to me that I've had to basically, we're playing 1980s offense right now because it's kind of all we can do. So they're not what they thought they were going to be. But the fact that they did pull it together to win 8 of 9 and get back in the SEC race, pretty impressive. Now they've lost 2 in a row, and dropping one at home to Georgia the other night I think has put everything sort of right back where they were a month ago, where everybody's wondering if Mark Pope's really the guy, to lead Kentucky to another national championship.
Okay, so with people wondering that, and for a coach who this job means so much to, I want to ask you about his state of mind. And you wrote about this in your feature on 24/7 Sports and how the pressure might be affecting him, talking to his former teammates. People should check that out. But like, how is he handling this? Because I don't think for coaches in general, we think about that enough, about how taxing this can be. And in that fan base, when you're an alum and it means so much to you and you have all that money invested from donors and such, there's a lot on his shoulders right now. How do you think he has handled this? And how has that evolved as the season's gone on?
Well, it's definitely evolved. I don't think he handled it well at all at the beginning of the season. I mean, he was saying some really strange things in press conferences after losses. He said that he had the sort of infamous line about wanting to crawl under the covers and harm himself. At which point Rick Pitino, his college coach, called him up and said, "Stop whining to the media. Like, stop talking about your problems. Just say we're going to get this right." And I do think it's something that Pope was really honest with me about, it's one of the things I haven't handled well. It's one of the things I had to learn in this job, is that like everything I say that is going to get blown up. Everything about the way he reacts is going to be, picked over and analyzed. But also, he is in this rare position, even a stranger, a total outsider coming into coach Kentucky is going to feel the external pressure of the fan base. But then Mark has his own internal pressure because he wants it more than anybody I've ever seen to win at Kentucky because of how much he loves that place. And the combination of those two things and then failure on top of it not just failure, but even some mockery, when he has so much pride in sort of representing the brand of Kentucky basketball. I think a lot of people were worried about him. Nobody that close to him wants to use the word worried, but I think a lot of them were. And I think he's had to be mindful now down the stretch of, what am I projecting to the outside world, and what am I projecting to my team? And I think that's a lesson to be learned. I mean, no coaching stop he's had before, or any coach has ever had before, prepares them for sort of what the microscope's going to be at Kentucky. And that's as big a part of the job. It's the one thing Cal got right for so long, until he didn't at the end, was the messaging. Like, as big a part of the job at Kentucky as the coaching basketball is recruiting the talent. And that's a whole other thing for Pope right now. Like, the recruiting's not going great, but the messaging is huge, and he's got to figure that part out as well.
All right, you mentioned the recruiting. We've talked about that at length on this show. We thought they were getting Tyron Stokes. That didn't happen. We thought they were getting Christian Collins. That didn't happen. I'm not sure some of the reporting on that. I just saw something on social media yesterday is fully in the know, but the bottom line is they don't have any of those guys. You talked about, like, what are the expectations for next year? I think the assumption is he's back. Does he have the same buying power? Is the pressure going to be that much more next year? What do you foresee in 26, 27?
That is the really interesting reality of college coaching in 2026, is that if your power brokers behind you pony up and they buy you a really good team and you squander it, do they want to do it again next year? And do they still believe in you? And even if they're willing to do it again the next year, if their motivation is for you to not be there anymore, if they've decided you're not the guy, then the money dries up, and then you don't have that money for the next run. And so, I don't know where people stand behind the scenes, the ones who really truly matter. At Kentucky, that's Joe and Kelly Kraft, the coal billionaires, heavily, and there are others, but where do they stand? Do they still believe that Mark Pope is the guy who can get it done? But the bottom line is, the money has been there, and they haven't put together, they didn't get the right guys in the portal, and they haven't gotten the elite players in high school basketball. It is so bizarre to me. It's like such a weird scenario that we are in. Seeing the greatest freshman class maybe ever in college basketball, and not one of those guys plays at the University of Kentucky after the run that they just had under John Calipari. That there's all these elite freshmen dominating college basketball, and not one of them is at Kentucky. And right as it stands, there won't be one there next year. And that, as much as Kentucky fans, I think, soured on the methods of John Calipari, relying too heavily on freshmen, they also don't want to not be in the club, so to speak, with any of these guys on the board. So to me, I do think Pope will be back, but I do think as well next year is make or break for him.
I want to also ask you about St. John's. You mentioned Rick Pitino. The thing that jumped out to me in his recent media comments, and I should share this for context, during that COVID year when he was at Iona, I was the color commentator for those. This was back when I was still at another network. And so I got to call his games. So it was like the refs, the score table, Iona, players and coaches, whoever they were playing, and then the people calling the game. So it's like a coaching clinic. You get to hear Pitino. You also get to follow his comments in the media, and you could see that move coming. When I saw him say this week, the plan was always 3 years and see how it goes at St. John's. And I'm paraphrasing, to be clear. Give it 3 good years. He said something to that extent. Did that raise eyebrows for you like it did for me?
Maybe a little bit, because, Rick is not afraid to move. He's not afraid to make one more. And, the question, does he have one more move in him? He's 73 years old. Does he have one more move in him? I don't know. I mean, he's got it going pretty good at St. John's right now. He's clearly got a bankroll. They have one of the most, you talk about expensive rosters. It's not Kentucky expensive, but they spent, reportedly over $10 million on their roster. They signed the #1 transfer class in the country, and completely remade a team. That team that won 31 games last year had one guy back, and they had to completely remake it, and they did. It didn't go great early this season, but they've now won 12 in a row. They're in control of the Big East. They beat UConn again. They've sort of supplanted UConn, at least for the time being, as the kings of the Big East under Pitino. The Garden is rocking. I mean, when they beat UConn and MSG the other night, it was awesome in there. And for a guy who's from New York, that's kind of a dream come true for Rick. And so I don't know. To me, this feels like a perfect final chapter. To me, like if I were writing the story, that's a perfect final chapter. But Rick Pitino might not have the same. Does a blue blood want to give him one more crack? Does Kentucky does Kentucky want one more ride with Rick Pitino in his last 2 or 3 years? If it all crashes and burns with Mark Pope. I don't know. Nothing with Rick would shock me. We've heard him say never ever, and the best ever, and all the things that he says. And then they all turns out to be hyperbole with him. But I will say it is incredible that at 73 years old, having been through the ringer that he has been through, to go to a place that hadn't won a conference title in 33 years and now be on the cusp of back-to-back at St. John's. To me, when people ask me this, if you had exactly the same players and you lined up all the coaches of all time to coach them, who are you picking? I want Rick Pitino.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Kyle, awesome as expected. Everyone should head on over to 247sports.com. Check out your stuff on Kentucky, St. John's, Texas A&M, and undoubtedly more to come. Welcome to the team, my man. We are thrilled that you are here. And if you're watching, don't go anywhere. We got another member of the team, Kyle Boone, coming up next. We're going to talk a little NBA draft big board right here on the CBS Sports Network. After this show is over, you can head on over to cbssports.com and check out my updated NBA draft big board. Yes, Darren Peterson is still number one. You can tell me how you feel about that on social media. And now we've got Kyle Boone, because no one tells me how they feel about my big board quite like Kyle Boone. And I'm here for it because you know what? He makes me think. He's as smart as he is kind. So Boone, we're going to call this segment, Are You Sure? And that's short for, Are you sure, Fink? So I will give you the floor for your first. Are you sure?
Yeah. So, Fink, are we sure that Cameron Boozer is not the number one pick?
No, we are not.
I saw you on the TikToks. You were talking about Darren Peterson being your number one prospect. I get it. And you know what? And I think if the draft were this week and most teams had the number one pick, they'd probably take Darren Peterson. But I think I'd probably take Cameron Boozer in a vacuum without context. Just the package that you can make with Cam Boozer being the number one prospect, 4 high school state titles, 3 Peach Jam titles, 2 gold medals. The dude's a winner. Net rating this season for Duke, with him on the floor, it's 31. With him off the floor, 23.9. They are significantly better with him in the lineup. Duke, by the way, 24-2 on the season, tracking to be a number 1 seed. Checks a lot of boxes. I think he's going to be versatile both inside and out, as he's shown this season. And you know what? There's not any questions about, does he want to continue playing basketball? Does he quit on his teammates in the middle of games? I don't have to deal with the mess that comes with Darren Peterson. I know Cam Boozer is going to be a stud at the NBA level. And yeah, I think I'm pretty sure I'd take him number 1.
No, I'm here for this conversation because I think amidst all the drama around Peterson, amidst AJ DeBonsa putting up huge numbers, but BYU losing games, all Cameron Boozer has been is the best player in college basketball. And he has a Duke team, which quite candidly has less of a supporting cast around him than they did around Cooper Flagg a year ago, as one of the 2 best teams in college basketball. So I think it is time we start asking ourselves, just as you have, very seriously, are we sure Cameron Boozer isn't the number 1 pick in the draft? It's a question worth asking, and you're spot on to bring it up. Well played, Mr. Boone. Good. Are you sure? Number 1. And just to be clear, we're going to keep asking ourselves that for the next 4 months here. What's your second? Are you sure? Because the first one was really good.
Yeah. So my second, are we sure Keaton Wagler, the Illinois freshman, is not a top 4 pick? Now, I know you do not have him top 4 on your NBA draft prospect rankings.
Got him 6.
Number 6, I think I mostly understand it because there's obviously a big 3 with AJ DeBonsa, Darryn Peterson, Cam Boozer. And then I think for the most part, right, like most of the draft community, you included, have Caleb Wilson at number 4. I would argue, I would posit to you, I think Keaton Wagler could be the number 4. And I think he has a chance to supplant Caleb Wilson. It's not a sure thing. There's a lot, obviously, that can change between now and the draft, but we're talking about a 6'6" point guard who's shooting 43% from 3. He gets to the rim. He creates both for himself and for his teammates. High usage, high efficiency, 81% on free throws this season. There's just a lot to like with Keaton Wagler, and I think probably we have anchored our opinion on who will be the number 4 prospect in this draft largely because of the preseason. We expected Caleb Wilson to be in the mix. We didn't expect Keaton Wagler to be in the mix. I think from what we've seen so far this season, there is very much a case to be had that you could take Wagler over Caleb Wilson. And I think as we get closer to the draft, there will be some real conversations about Caleb Wilson versus Keaton Wagler.
You know what I am sure of?
Mm.
That Keaton Wagler is not going to redshirt this year, because I think a lot of people, including people around the Illinois program, that was the expectation about a year ago. To your point, I'm not sure where this guy ends up. I do think the draft community tends to subscribe to a certain amount of groupthink, which is why I value your feedback so much. And I do think it's possible that Wagler could continue to rise because there just aren't many lead guards who can match his size, his skill, his feel, and the fact that he never gets sped up. Like when you have one of those players who manages to slow the game down and force everyone to play at his speed, that's pretty impressive stuff. Boone, you're the best. People don't go anywhere. Boone and I are coming back next hour too on CBS Sports Network. I got to go get a jacket on. But before that, we're coming back with my final shot right here. Don't go anywhere. Today is a sad day for the basketball media community and the Tennessee basketball media community in particular. Wes Rucker, who covered the Tennessee program, passed away last night in an automobile accident. I didn't know Wes. I want to be transparent about that. But prior to working for WBIR, where he was covering the Vols, he previously worked for 24/7 Sports. And I have a number of colleagues who are heartbroken today and say nothing but tremendous things. Wes was far too young. He described himself on his own social media bio as Hank's dad, Lauren's husband. And from what we understand, he and Lauren were expecting their second child. So for anyone interested in learning more about Wes or how they can help the family, you can follow my social media or any one of my 24/7 colleagues. We're going to be sharing that online. Again, I did not know Wes. I don't want to pretend I did, but I've heard nothing but great things, and I know a young family needs help. So you can check out my social media. I will be retweeting any links, and let's just all remember that basketball is a game, and there are some big things in life, and most people you see along the way are dealing with something that you have no idea about. So as you join us every week, we hope we provide you some entertainment. We hope to see you again next week. As a reminder, you can find all of our past episodes on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. You can also find content from all of our other contributors there, Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish with the Eye on College Basketball podcast. John Rothstein has his annual podcast. We've got clips from various shows throughout the course of the week. You can find it all there, the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. We'll see you next week.